Everyone, thank you for tuning in for another episode of Paranomaly Beyond Disclosure. We are a weekly podcast dedicated to sincere, in-depth investigations into the paranormal, supernatural, and the metaphysical, with a special focus on the UFO topic. We take a sincere, analytical approach, thoroughly evaluating each case and its implications. Our discussions go beyond the surface as we engage with researchers, investigators, and experiencers to explore the deeper layers of their testimonies. We strive for high-resolution analysis, carefully examining evidence, patterns, and perspectives that challenge conventional thinking. If you're looking for a podcast that seeks deeper understanding, you're in the right place. Please be sure to like and subscribe and follow to receive notifications when new content is made available. You can also visit us at www.paranomalypodcast.com for more content and information, including all our social links. Thank you again for watching or listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode of Paranomaly Beyond Disclosure. Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in tonight for this episode of Paranomaly Beyond Disclosure. We have Suzanne, is it Chancellor?
Chancellor.
Okay, perfect. Now, Susan, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Okay, well, I grew up in California. I was born and raised in California. And I moved to Rhode Island in 2012. So I've been here for about 13 years. And I am a lifelong experiencer. I grew up thinking that a lot of the things that had happened to me were just like wild dreams. I always thought I was just an avid dreamer. And my mother thought the same thing because I would always come to her with really crazy stories, and she'd say, "Oh, honey, that was just a dream." And I'd be like, okay. But then when I got into elementary school, my teachers started sending notes home to my mother asking if these stories I was telling her or them were true. And she would say, "Oh, well, she just has a very vivid imagination." So I have two daughters. One lives in New Zealand, one lives in Portland, Oregon. I'm a grandmother of 5. And let's see, I don't know, you want to know what I like to do? Or you just want to know about my background? I mean,
I have a quick question.
Yes.
When you was young, little, did you have any kind of paranormal experiences? Like say, like ghost hauntings, things like that?
I did. And I don't know if it was just my own curiosity, because at a very young age, I was actually very interested in witchcraft. And my best friend and I, we used to check out a bunch of books on witchcraft. And so we would read everything and we would, make spells and, things like that. And so I think I was just really open to the idea that there was something else. But I also, on the other hand, I was also very interested in religion. And I don't know if I was searching for something, when I think back about how I was so into learning more about witchcraft, I was equally as interested in learning about all the different religions. And so maybe my young brain was trying to find a reason or find the answer to the things that were really happening to me subconsciously without really knowing why. And that was just a theory that I had when I got older.
So those interests were kind of inexplicable in that, like, there wasn't like a past experience or upbringing that naturally sort of gave rise to those interests.
No, not at all.
Anomalous to some degree.
No. Yeah. And then, going along with that, became very interested in, reading a lot of science fiction books when I was young. I was reading Dune and the Martian Chronicles and and reading Omni magazine when I was like about 9 or 10 years old. And so, I don't know if that's also just because I was just so curious about just science fiction, like a lot of kids are. I think a lot of kids thought that was really cool, watching Outer Limits and Twilight Zone and stuff like that, and just really opened up your mind to the possibilities of, other realities, or, maybe this isn't all there is. So definitely maybe the breadcrumbs were just being laid for me somehow in a weird way.
So was it the dreams that came first? Were the dreams kind of the more prominent sort of early childhood experience that was suggestive of something unusual about you?
Yeah, I did start having these precognitive dreams when I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, and I started writing them down. I'm glad I did. I love to write as much as I love to read. So whenever I would have these dreams, I would remember them, and then I would turn my light on and write them down so I wouldn't lose it before I went back to sleep. And then into my teenage years, again, just ramping up, just all these precognitive dreams where I would just, I remember once I was getting ready for work, and I dreamed that there was this, like a VW rabbit, and it was driving on a golf course. And I could hear, it was like I was an observer. I could hear the dewy grass underneath the wheels, and I could see that it started to fishtail a little bit. And it fishtailed and T-boned a tree. And the driver got out, and it was a teenage boy, and he went around to the passenger side, and there was a girl slumped over the seat, and it was his girlfriend, and she had died. And I was just horrified, and I woke up and I thought, oh my God, that was so horrible. I mean, it was so real. And so I wrote it down in the morning. I usually would read the paper before I got ready to go to work. And on the second page of the paper, there was an article about that very thing happening in our local golf course, that this car had T-boned a tree and a girl had died. And so I went and I ran to my mom and I said, Mom, I just dreamed this last night. And she says, you did not. And I said, no, I did. She says, you must have seen that beforehand. I said, no, I dreamed that entire thing, right down to what the car looked like. And the color of it was like a beige VW Rabbit. So
about that dream. So what was in the dream, what was your perspective of the scene? Like, was there panning, or were you seeing it sometimes from a close perspective and sometimes from a far away perspective, or what's happening insofar as like the perspective? Because I feel like that it's got to have some kind of clue in it as to what these are, and
I don't know.
Why do they happen? It's not obvious.
I felt like I was, what it was like? It almost felt like I was a director of a film. So I was behind everything. And then when the car T-boned, I went to the side and I was, looking at it from a totally different angle, So
was it almost kind of cinematic in a way, where was the panning and everything such that it almost seems kind of like it was designed to have a good look to it, to have a good appearance. It wasn't just utilitarian, like there was some kind of cinematic quality to the perspective, or no?
No, I almost felt, well, number one, it was very dark. There was no lighting at all. So it was like real time. Like I was really there.
Okay.
But it was not cinematic. It almost felt like I was just there. Like I was in the periphery. I was a silent observer, just watching this happen. And not that I was even flying. I did have some dreams where I did have OBEs leaving my body and flying around my neighborhood and things like that. It wasn't anything like that. It was totally different.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So do you think that, because with some prophetic dreams, it seems like what they're seeing isn't actually the actual scene. Like if you were to, after the dream, actually see it happening, there wouldn't be an exact match. And sometimes it seems like it's more of like a representation of what happened.
Mm.
And maybe it's a close representation, but it's not exactly as if, all the details aren't correct.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not always the case. What do you think it was in your situation? Do you think that, I mean, I know you can't know for sure.
Right. I mean, obviously when I read the article and I saw the car and the tree, it looked like exactly what it was. But I don't know the details surrounding the actual accident itself.
Like how it went down and, what was
Right. Like I don't
and everything.
exactly. But I do remember even where they snuck in. They snuck in between two houses. I remember that. And there was a fence, and there was a break in the fence, and they went through these two houses with their little car and went down into the golf course. I do remember that detail. I don't remember if that detail showed up in the article. I really think I would have remembered that if that were the case.
And so what are your thoughts on, before we move on from this experience, what in prophetic dreams, what are your thoughts on why? Because obviously in that one, like you weren't in any kind of position to sort of prevent this or anything like that, and I think in most cases, the dreamer is not really in any kind of position to do anything about the oncoming event. And they probably in most cases don't really recognize it as prophetic until they see in the newspaper.
Right. That's a good question. Yeah.
And why would you, and why would you, even after having prophetic dreams, start to take every dream seriously? Because I would still think that of all the dream content, most of it is not prophetic. And so it doesn't seem like that would be, if something was trying to like, get you to do something about it, to take some kind of action. The dream medium just doesn't work for this, because you're just getting way too much noise compared to signal, and you're not going to start taking everything seriously.
Right. That's true.
What are your thoughts on why? Or is it just your consciousness is, for whatever reason, out there floating around, it randomly sort of connects with that event for whatever applicable reason, or what do you think?
I've thought about a lot of these things that you're talking about, so I'm glad you're bringing it up. At the time that I started having these dreams, I really didn't know that I was an experiencer yet. So I hadn't shared any of that part. I haven't shared any of those dreams with anybody, because I was so freaked out about them, and they seemed so different that I was afraid to share them. I mean, they were just so graphic and so scary that I thought, man, my brain is just wild, But when I started having these dreams, that I was a lot more curious about them. And so at the time, like I said, I didn't know why they were happening, but knowing now that I was having experiences, I think that I just became more psychic, or more psychically aware. And so when I was thinking about it, I said, well, that must be what it is then. Maybe I'm just psychic, because I knew that there were people out there who were psychic. And so that would be the only explanation that seemed rational to me at the time. Yeah. So, but I still kept it to myself. I didn't walk around saying, oh, I'm psychic and I have these, I wasn't proud of it. I was scared to death.
And Suzanne, that brings this. There's a young lady here. Her name is Ange, and she had a question for you. She says, Suzanne, have you always had a knowing, psychic abilities, and do you meditate? So
I think that I had a knowing probably from right around that time, like when I was 9 or 10 years old. Yes. Meditating. I was actually more of an avid meditator when I was younger than I am now, because my life is just so busy. I just don't take the time, and it's really a horrible thing that I don't. But I was very into meditation when TM back in the day, now you know how old I am, was a really hot topic. All my friends were like, yeah, let's try this transcendental meditation. It seems awesome. Yeah, let's get groovy. And so we did that for a while. It was just, I think it was more like a phase that kids did, But so the answer is I do meditate, but not as often as I should, for sure.
Yeah, and that was part of why I asked you earlier if you have had any kind of paranormal experiences with like ghosts and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
because that ability, that psychic ability, uh, that definitely comes out. And
Mm-hmm.
talking to others that have had ET experiences and stuff, a lot of them have these paranormal things that happen as well. So I was
Mm-hmm.
just curious on that one. So thank you.
No worries. Yeah, I really think, we're talking about all this now with dreams and precognition, dreams, just dreams that are even just dreams that are just weird, or seeing ghosts, or seeing apparitions, or seeing people who see auras, people who can hear people's thoughts. I think all of these things are connected, and they all go hand in hand. So I think somebody who is psychic is prone to maybe seeing other beings, or ghosts, or shadow beings. A lot of people see a lot of shadow. I saw my first shadow figure a year ago. I didn't see my first UFO craft until in the mid 90s. So I mean, I'm talking about like from below staring at the sky. I did have an experience on a craft when I was 9, but I wasn't outside of the craft. I never actually saw the exterior of the craft. I only saw the interior. So, I mean, it's just, I don't know what, at the time I didn't know what it was all about. And now I'm starting to get into doing a lot more research about my own experiences in all different areas, including having orb sightings. And that really fascinates me. I'm actually doing a lot of research on that at the moment. But I think thinking more about why there is precog, and now thinking a lot more about retrocausality and what is time really. So we know that time does not exist. I really believe that everything is happening all at once at the same time. I don't think so. That would explain so much about precognition. Retrocausality, things happen backwards. So I was
Yeah.
very thrilled to read about this and thinking that maybe now I can have a little peace, thinking that maybe that would be an answer to a lifelong question. So I think it's very interesting.
So how did the dreams progress? So you started to have the precognitive dreams, and then I think you started to have some other weird dreams that weren't
Yeah,
exactly that.
right.
Is that maybe the next logical
Yeah,
direction?
I mean, I will do one more. There were a couple of dreams. One of them, I was about 26 or 20, right around the time that communion came out. So like
Mhm.
1987.
Mhm.
I had a dream, and I was a hairdresser back in the day. Um, and I had a dream that was so real. And I came in, and my first client, she was getting a permanent wave, so I was wrapping her hair, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I need to tell you the story I had last night, or this dream I had last night." So I said, I had this dream that I saw my 8th grade boyfriend named Benji, and he was Mormon, and he was a super nice guy. And I dreamed that he just walked up to me, and he was wearing denim overalls and a white t-shirt. And it was so real that I said, "Can I give you a hug?" And he said, "Yes." And so I went up and I gave him the biggest hug. And it was like I was really touching him. It was so wild. And I was telling her, I said, "You don't understand how real this was to me." Now, as I'm telling her this story, I'm looking out the window, and I was Mormon actually when I was married. So ironically, I became a Mormon. And I was looking out the window as I was doing her hair, and I see a guy from my church walk by with an amplifier. There was a music store next to my salon, and he was a musician. He was bringing the amp back to the store he rented. And he looked at me through the window, and he went, "Hold on a second," like that. I said, "Oh my gosh, that's Tim. What's he doing here?" So he comes back and he comes into the back door. I said, "Hey, Tim, how's it going?" And he's like, "And everything's great." And he says, "I just have one question. Do you remember this guy?" And he opened the door and in walked Benji, wearing blue denim overalls and a white t-shirt. And my client's face, because I said, "That's Benji." And I just finished telling her the story of the dream. And he looked at me and I looked at him. I said, Can I please give you a hug?" Just like the dream. And I said, "You're not going to believe this. I just dreamed about you last night. And this exact scenario happened exactly as it is."
Oh, so it was the exact scenario. The way you hugged him.
Everything.
Everything exact. Okay.
Everything. And so
What is
that was.
So,
I don't know.
That's just so puzzling.
Yeah. Puzzling.
And I could well, before we get to that question, describe the vividness of that dream compared to real life. Now, how vivid are we talking about?
Just like it's
almost identical to real life, just with subtle
Yes,
differences, or a very vivid
exactly.
dream, or very much like real life.
Well, yeah, like I had said to her, I said, "You don't understand how real it was. It was so, like, I could feel his warmth of his skin as I'm holding, my arms around him." So, I mean, obviously, a lot of people have a lot of recollection of detail in their dreams, but to me, it just seemed like this is really happening.
Yeah.
And so,
I always
yeah.
find that interesting because I've never had a dream like that where it
Oh,
was that
wow.
vivid, like to where it was almost like real life. Like even the most vivid dreams I have, there's a big difference still. There's a big
Hmm.
gulf between that and actual real
Hmm.
life, the
Hmm.
tangibility of real life. So I'm just always fascinated to hear that. I mean, to me, it seems like maybe for whatever reason, your consciousness in that night is just sort of jumped to that future experience and was living, and like you just said,
Yes.
everything's
Yes.
happening right now, that there
Right.
is no linear timeline.
Right.
And that's
Right.
possible,
Right.
but why did it do it? Did he turn out like what did anything unfold from that with him?
No, he was just visiting. He moved to Idaho when we were in high school,
Hmm.
and I hadn't seen him since. So it had been,
Mm-hmm.
what, 20 years?
So how did you know
No,
exactly
less than that.
so in the dream, how did you know for sure, being that he was 20 years older than when you knew him, that he just still looked the same, or
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. And thinking
or did
about
you have a
it,
knowing? Was there a
I know
knowing
he
as
was his older self, but I still recognized his energy. I think
Mm,
I knew it was Benji because it was just Ben. Even when people age, they still resemble their younger self.
yeah.
I mean, and we were still quite young. I mean, we were only in our, we were like 27 years old. So it wasn't like we had gray hair or, we're balding or anything like that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so
so,
it's just such a mystery, whether there's some spiritual significance to that, like that
well, I have my
for a
theories.
reason, or whether it's just, kind of there's just some glitchy aspects to consciousness, and sometimes, it just
Right.
does
Well,
things and there's no rhyme or reason to it. What are your theories?
well, um, well, I'll share the next one I had a few more and they're all pretty similar to the one that I just shared. I mean, I'll tell you this one. So I dreamed that as a hairdresser, um, I dreamed that I was in England actually, and I had like a big gown on, and I had like the big hair, like the Marie Antoinette updo, that thing, right? And I'm
So
waltzing
not
around
modern day England. We're talking about
like
historic England.
16, right, right.
Mm,
And there's a harpsichord in the background. So what would be like the 1600s maybe, or like early 1700s maybe.
mm-hmm.
And so I'm dancing around and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and I turned around and it's one of my clients, but he's dressed in present day modern wear. And he said, "May I have this dance?" And I said, "Sure, that's fine." I said, "Terry, what are you doing here?" And so we're dancing, and my grandmother comes up and she taps on his shoulder and she says, "You can't dance with her. She's a married woman," like that. And it was funny. I wasn't even married at the time, but she said that. He's like, "Oh, pardon me," and he kind of just walked away. And I remember when I woke up in the morning and I went, "Well, that was a really weird dream."
That's really
So,
weird. That's so.
well,
That's just
well,
like,
it's not weird yet.
oh, go on.
No, it gets better. So I'm getting ready for work, and I get in my car. I'm driving to the salon. I'm driving down the freeway, and I need to merge to the right to get off the freeway. So I look in my rearview mirror, and when I do, he is in the car behind me. He's driving. Terry is driving the car behind me.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, what? So I merge over, I put on my right turn signal, and I make a right off the off ramp. And he gets behind me and does the same. So then I'm like, okay, so I get all the way to the left because I have to make a left turn. I turn my left blinker on and get into the left turn lane, sit at the light, and he's right behind me again. I'm thinking, wait a minute. So I make a left turn, pull into the parking lot of our salon. I get out of the car. I run to the front desk because I'm freaking out. I just sprinted. Walk in the door and go to the front desk, and I look at my appointment book. My first appointment had canceled, and he had called overnight and taken that appointment without me knowing it.
Your first appointment had canceled, and he had taken that.
Yes.
He was the one,
Yes.
and he was on his way there. That's why he was making all the same turns.
That is correct. He was
Yeah.
my first appointment at 9. He was my 9 o'clock appointment. So somebody must have called and canceled after I'd left work for the day. And then he had called to see if I had any openings. And she said, "Oh, ironically, she just had a cancellation at 9 o'clock." And he took that appointment without me knowing, but I dreamed about him. And so when
it wasn't like a prophetic dream of, how the haircut went down,
no, it wasn't. It was just,
when
so my assistant was shampooing his hair, and I'm shaking because I'm thinking, why is this happening? I'm trying to read into it. Like, is something bad going to happen? Or, you think about people who are psychic, they might prophesy something horrible happening to somebody that they dream about. And so I was hoping that wasn't going to be the case.
Yeah, when high strangeness happens, along with it, is sometimes just this kind of ominous feeling, like, oh, what's gonna happen? If this is just happening, like, what's next? There's always that feeling, like, what's next now?
Right.
Like this is getting strange, and so
Right.
they're always kind of, not always, but most of the time, you're kind of laden with this kind of ominous feeling.
Yes.
And how did that, and anything significant happen in that interaction with him?
Yeah, I just said, "You're not going to believe
Tell
this."
him the dream.
I did. I told him the dream. He turned around and he looked at me. He said, "What in the heck?" And I said, I can't explain it. I just thought I would share that with you." I said, "Nothing bad happened." I said, "I too tend to have these dreams and nothing bad happens, so I wouldn't worry." That's another thing. I hesitate to share these things because I don't want people to think that, oh my gosh, my daughters had even said that to me. They said, "Mommy, if you ever dream something bad happening to me, don't tell me." And I'm thinking, well, I don't even want to think that I would ever have that dream in the first place. So anyway, that was just so those were 3 of I think the most profound prophetic dreams that I can remember, except for the one that I had in 2011 that to me seemed more like remote viewing, which I at the time knew nothing about. And so I didn't really know how to, it was different than the other dreams. So what had happened was, I dreamed, I was living in Hollywood at the time in California, and I dreamed that I woke up and I was standing holding hands with 5 other people. We were all in a chain, and we were all looking at each other kind of like, what are we doing here? And why are we holding hands? It's kind of a weird thing. But then all of a sudden we looked ahead and our focus shifted from us and focused on a bus that looked like it had just like tipped over on its side. Like there wasn't another car involved in an accident per se. It just looks like it lost its balance and just tipped over. So we all looked at each other, we dropped our hands and we ran to the bus. So we ran to the bus and we went into the bus. And when I say I went into the bus, I actually went through the glass windshield of the bus. It's like my energy went into the bus.
And so you knew that there was some alteration of consciousness there because you went straight for the solid, was it the windshield or whatever
Correct.
it was?
Correct.
And so you're
Yes.
already, having some kind of knowing of, or some direction somehow of what to do and what you can do and what's possible to do.
Right.
Go
But
on.
then again, it was a dream. So, I mean, things happen in dreams, right?
Yeah.
I didn't realize right at this point in the dream that it was strange. But what was interesting is that when I went into the bus, it was full of women and children, and they were crying, and some were hanging from their seatbelts. And I noticed that there was this one woman, and she was speaking to me telepathically, which was interesting. But she was speaking in a different language. So she was saying, "Help my baby." But even though I knew it was a different language, I could still understand what she was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking for a baby, and I looked and I saw a little baby girl, not baby, but she was a toddler, underneath the seat. So I pulled her out from underneath the seat and I unlatched the mom's seatbelt because all her weight was on it. And so she was having a hard time getting herself off of it. She was afraid of hurting herself, and she was worried about the baby, didn't know where the baby was. So once I did that, I looked around, and the other people that I was with were all doing the same thing that I was doing. They were all attending to somebody. And when I kind of did a quick scan of the bus to make sure that nobody else was severely injured, all of a sudden I felt like I got sucked back out of the bus. And I was being pulled back into my body by something. And so I whooshed into my body, and it was kind of like this, like that, and I woke up sitting up, and I was like, oh my God, what was that? And it was morning. So I remember it was a Saturday, and my boyfriend at the time, he was sleeping, and I woke him up. I said, oh my God, I have to tell you this dream. So I told him the dream, and he's like, you're just crazy. I'm like, yeah, I know I'm crazy, but this is the weirdest thing I've never ever seen. It was so real. It was just like this, like, and I was trying to emphasize, like, just the dynamic of all the details, and just how I could feel how hot it was too. It was like summertime, so it was really hot. I felt that.
So again, like real life vividness we're talking about, like
absolutely.
As far as you could feel the heat and everything, and when you're moving the child around or trying to get the child out of the seat, you're feeling the weight of the child, and everything is like physical reality.
Yeah, I even remember the woman who I helped. She had really short. She was probably about mid-30s, but she had really short hair. I remember what she was wearing, so it was just so like the detail, like you remember certain details that I just couldn't shake it. And all day long that day, I could not shake the dream. I mean, I had a lot of errands to run, and I just kept thinking, God, that dream. And so when I got home, I got on my computer and I just Googled like bus crash, and then I typed in like Europe, because I thought, well, it sounded like a European language.
Mm-hmm.
And then I typed in the date, and I scrolled through, and on the third page, there was this little thumbnail of a bus. And it was like the bus was one of those double-decker type of buses where, you put all your luggage on the bottom, and then the seating area is on the second level. So it is a little top heavy, so I could understand the physics behind why it toppled over, you know what I mean? But when I saw this thumbnail of this bus, I'm like, oh my God, that's the bus. So I clicked on it, and the article was about this bus that had tipped over in Bulgaria. And it was full of women and their daughters for a summer camp. And there was one fatality. And I was like, what? I'm like, how did I miss that? That was my first thought. I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe I saw that someone had died while they were ejected from the bus. I didn't see that before I got pulled out, to go back in my body. I only saw the interior. I didn't see the exterior when I left. So I looked at the date and the...
Hey, Suzanne, what was your immediate emotional reaction or your response as soon as you seen that thumbnail?
Oh, my heart sunk. I felt like the wind was knocked out of me. Because then, I mean, I'm thinking all these...
Scary feeling?
Yeah, because very scary. I'd never experienced anything like that before. And I felt like something was happening that was beyond my control.
Do you believe that's like astral travel? Like precognition or something else?
Right. That's what I was saying earlier, Todd. It was like, this was so different than the other precognitive dreams that I had had, because this, come to find
You're
out,
actually like an active participant in
right. Well, I failed to add that I looked at the date and the time of the accident, and it happened when I was sleeping. So I knew it happened in real time. And so all these questions came up. It took me a while to really try and figure out, exactly what it would be. But one of my theories was that when we sleep, you hear of people who have sightings of angels when they're in an accident. And let's say, oh, this angel came and saved me. And I was, they pulled me out of the wreckage type of thing. I mean, I've heard this.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, are we the guardian angels doing this work while we're sleeping?
That makes you wonder.
It does.
Doesn't it?
So many questions about this.
I know.
Now, so they're seeing you, for one, like you're saying, the first woman you approach saw you. And said to you, can you help my daughter? So she sees you. And did you look into the case? Was there anything odd report? Like, were there any survivors of that case, do you know, that reported anything odd about what happened?
No, I know.
You didn't?
I didn't. Because at the time I wasn't really deeply invested in this whole thing. I was literally just starting to open up about my own personal experiences.
Yeah.
And so I hadn't even gone down that road yet of thinking, oh, maybe I should contact, the newspaper,
Right.
But obviously in retrospect, that probably would have been the smartest thing to do. That would have been interesting.
And was it very necessitous that they had help? I mean, it tipped over and one person died. But do you think that the assistance that you provided was actually valuable and made a difference? It felt like,
I do.
Like it was a sort of like there was a true like necessity, I guess.
Well, we were there before any first responders, so I mean, I feel that it was like that, and we were there, and it just happened.
And are you kind of still, like, when you're in the bus and you're doing the things, are you still kind of like split in your mind? Is there still a part of you that, like, what is happening? Like, what?
No.
At that point, like, you're completely, what you're doing.
Right.
You're
yeah.
Was there any other sort of, like, did you have any sense of identity or different identity than your normal identity at that?
Yes.
Can you put words to that at all?
Yes. I feel like what I was doing was beyond. I felt like I was a first responder. Like somebody going to, the Twin Towers, and it's like you just go into this mode and nothing else exists, and that's exactly how I felt.
And
I
like
felt
you were
like
trained,
I was my mission.
Did you feel like you had training on doing that kind of thing? Or
I think it was. I felt like it was inherent for some reason.
It was
But I
just
don't, yeah, it was
intuitive knowing was guiding you
absolutely.
more than actually like past training exercise.
Yes, for sure.
Do you feel like you were supposed to be there? Like you know how people like astral projection, but
right.
you, for whatever reason, was there when that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
and then you had just said that you felt like you was like a first responder. You was there. You was like right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I almost, like I just said, I felt like I didn't have any control of my being there. I felt, and I've never had an experience like that since. So
That's
I
so
don't,
weird that
it
would
was like
just
a
be a one. Yeah.
one-off, and I've had a few of those. So, and maybe it's just part of the phenomenon. It's like, okay, let's show you what you can do, type of thing. And maybe a lot of experience, or I've never heard anybody have this experience. So like within, talking to other experiencers, I've never heard anybody share a story similar to this.
Right.
To this day.
We're just trying to break this down with you, and
Thank you.
and try to not only help you remember, but for
Yeah.
us as well, because we're
try to
lost.
make sense of it. Yeah. Sorry.
But let me ask this question: because of this type of experience, where you thought maybe you was a first responder, you supposed to be there, maybe to help or what have you. Are you in any kind of professional job where you do help people, things like that?
I was a hairdresser for 34 years, so no.
Okay.
I mean, that's a different type of help, but
yeah.
So it's your identity at that time is not in any way sort of aligned with your human identity. What about your physical capacity, besides like the obvious capacity to move through solid matter to get into the bus? Did you feel like you were capacitated beyond what you normally are as a human during that assisting those passengers?
Well, I felt, I didn't feel, it's like, I don't even say I didn't feel human, because I didn't really feel like I identified with my human body. But I do remember seeing our hands, so I knew that we were in physical form. But beyond that, I don't remember. And I did pick up the baby and all that, but I almost felt like this other type of energy where, I don't know how to explain it. It's so hard, because obviously I went through a window. Yeah. So what does that mean? I mean, it's just, what are we then when we're able to do, people go through walls and stuff when they have these abductions, they go through the ceiling.
Yeah.
So what is that? It's the same theory in my eyes. It's inexplicable. It's just bizarre.
I know. I think that there could be this frequency that is right outside of the one where we're on, where we're still kind of like physical, but not physical, like almost in between physical and not physical. Because I mean, I just don't understand, like, so you could see your hands and stuff, and you're saying you felt physical, but yet you,
I was running. I felt that too.
mhm.
And I remember jumping up into the window, like springing up. So I don't want to say like a superhuman feeling, but maybe, just an altered human,
Yeah.
I feel like, go ahead.
Was the well, finish that thought real quick, and then because this is
I'm saying there's something about, okay, this is just my brain. So when we have altered frequency, or when in an altered state, our molecular structure changes. And so I think it opens up something within our consciousness and our conscious awareness, and also our ability to transcend this this dimensional reality and this vibrational reality. And I feel that these things are happening all the time, but I think there's like you know, when people say glitches in the matrix, but I think there's also blips in when there's like a dimensional overlap. And I feel that when these overlaps happen, things blip in and out of our frequency. And this might be one of those things that I was over there. This might have been one of those blips that I just, and these 5 other people blipped at the same time. And but they were obviously I think they were also experiencers, I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's what the last thing I wanted to ask you is, so they were all young children or kids, or what was your age at the time? And did they seem all of a similar age? And they were all,
well,
was it just a random cross selection of people, or was it like
right. Well, when this happened to me, I was older, but the kids, they were all like, you know, adolescents going to a camp with their moms who were like, you know, in their 30s or so, something like young adults, parents, you know, young mothers.
But the group that was outside the box,
we were all, I mean, various ages. I remember there was one man that had gray hair. I was in my late 40s at the time. So
interesting. And for that first moment, you're all just perplexed, you know?
Yeah, we're looking at each other like, what are we doing here? That was the first thought.
And then just
yeah.
in.
And then it was like beeline, and nobody questioned anything. And we didn't have any interaction after that moment of standing next to each other.
There's no communication amongst that group while it was going on. There was no like, yeah, I got this guy over here, and
nope,
go in the back.
And it was all telepathic communication too. So what's that all about?
So there was telepathic communication, but not with the group, but with you and the passengers.
Correct.
And they were communicating telepathic, so they weren't like speaking words. It didn't seem like they were speaking.
No.
Mouths were closed,
like she was thinking, "Help my baby," like that.
This is just
perplexing,
such, enigmatic. It's one of the most enigmatic dreams I think I've heard.
Pleasant dreams.
But okay, well, let's progress to the next bizarre dream.
Well, I haven't really had any other dreams like that since, ironically.
Like that?
No, but of all the experiences that I've had in my life, I feel like the experience has changed, and it seems to have evolved into a completely different type of experience. And I've had a few conversations with a few experiencers who have said the same thing, where it seems as though different periods in our lives, it's almost like a progression of contact. Beginning with my first experience happened when I was 4 years old, but I didn't recollect that experience until I read Communion in 1987, like most of the population did.
No, just real quick interjection. When you say progression, you mean at a certain age you're having these types of experiences, and then you're having a different type of experience, and then in terms of progression, you mean like a series of different types of experiences?
Correct.
Basically. Okay.
Correct. But the first experience I recalled was after I read Communion. I remember now. At this point, I had a 1-year-old daughter, and I still had not told anybody about any of my crazy dreams. And I went to Barnes and Noble, and I was holding my daughter, and I walked in, and there was a shelf facing the front door of new releases. And when I saw the cover of Communion, I almost dropped my baby, because I was in shock that I was looking at the face of this being. And I picked it up, and I even forgot what I went in there for. I just picked up
before you go into what happened next, what was the emotion of the shock? You know, characterize that, or
I was scared out of my mind.
Like immediate recognition of that face, like I've seen that face before, kind of feeling. but you don't know where. Was it like, where did I see that face before? Or you know where you
Yep.
saw that face
Nope.
before? No.
I did not know. It was just like, it freaked me out. It was kind of like whenever you see like a scary movie poster and you're like, oh, I really want to watch that, but man, that's creepy, you know?
Yeah.
I really wanted to read the book, but the cover just freaked me out. And I read the cover leaf and I was like, who is this? And what is he writing? And so I bought the book and I went home and I read it in 24 hours. I just did not put it down. And this is back in the day when we wrote letters and then post them in the mail. And
Yeah.
I wrote Whitley an 11-page letter and I sent it to his publisher because I felt like he had written a book about me. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe, it was just pouring out of me. And I just page after page and writing just like, and this happened and this happened. And
What were you including in the 11
oh my
pages?
gosh, just like when I was, because he shared these things that had happened to me or to him. And so I was thinking, wow, okay, so this happened to somebody else but me. I thought that was a dream. And the first thing was, when I had these beings come to me when I was 4 and put me back in my bed and took me in. I thought that was a dream, but he was describing them exactly to a T to what I had seen, including this being on the cover.
So when you read in that 24-hour period, communion, you were jogging your memory, but you were recalling abduction
Correct.
experiences.
Correct.
Like you weren't just, oh, I remember that dream that I had. No, like you were actually opening up new memories that you didn't have before.
Yes. So it's like once you start, some things jar your memory. And so the way that he was phrasing things and his surroundings and just even like things that he was seeing in the periphery, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, yes. And I was just thinking, okay, so now I'm freaking out because these things weren't dreams. And then I was scared out of my mind because what really happened then? And so I needed some sort of resolution. And so I thought the only way I could do that is by writing to him. And unfortunately, the letter was returned. Apparently I didn't have the right address or they just didn't want to forward it to him. They just couldn't be bothered. And I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. I remember I thought, man, but then I was just reeling from the thought that, oh my gosh, if this is really happening, then what about my baby and what about my job? And, like, what if I can't talk about this because, they're going to think I'm crazy. I was so afraid to open up about my, I felt like I was leading a double life,
Right.
Here on the one hand, I had a great job. I had a wonderful daughter and eventually remarried and had another child. And just, it was amazing. I could not even think of sacrificing any of that for telling my truth. And so I didn't.
I have a personal question here. It's a little bit maybe odd, but was there any, when you found out that you were so you pretty much put together pretty quickly that you are an abductee or you think that you may be an abductee, was there any egoic element to finding that out? Or was it just at that time, 0% ego, I've met aliens or anything? There was nothing like that going on. And I'm just from a
quite
spiritual
the opposite.
I'm wondering if, quite the opposite.
Jim, I'll tell you why. Because this is like uncharted territory that we're, getting into at that time. And nobody was really having these discussions. This is the first book that had been published with this being on the cover. He was a very brave man to come forward. He risked a lot to tell his story. He was a very successful fiction writer. And ironically, wrote one of my favorite, a movie, The Hunger. Had no idea he had written the book, The Hunger. And that was one of my favorite movies. I loved vampires. And I was just like, how did he write that book? And now he wrote this book about the aliens, and so I was just devastated because now on the one hand, I was thrilled that somebody else like had this experience. I was devastated that I had to just, not tell anybody about it and just keep it to myself. And a very lonely existence, let me tell you. Has not been easy.
Which is one of the major traumas of the abductee, as we were mentioning last episode. There's the experiences themselves, there's the feeling that it can happen again, there's that sort of trauma, and then there's the isolation. You can't tell anybody.
Horrible. And then the fear, because once you realize that these things have been happening, now you're like going to bed at night and leaving on a nightlight,
Right.
Just like, okay, so should I lock, I mean, obviously that's, it's futile. I mean, you're not going to be able to keep any of that from happening. It's going to happen regardless. So, but at the time, I remember one time when I was younger, we had moved from Pasadena to a place called Newbury Park. It was about an hour north of, or about 40 minutes north of Los Angeles. And we had bought a house there. My dad got a job at Northrop. And we got a house on a cul-de-sac. And I remember we're pulling into the cul-de-sac, looking at the house for the very first time. We bought it sight unseen. And I looked at the cul-de-sac and I went, oh, this is a perfect place for a craft to land. I'm thinking, why did I think that? Where did that come from? And then, oh yes, so I started having, experiences there. And that's when I actually started having my out-of-body experiences as well. So
can we get into, and I know your memories of this might be really fragmented, but what you were recollecting as you were reading Communion and the what were you remembering? Do you have any particular abduction experiences that you can tell kind of with some continuity, or is it very? I mean, what if anything can you tell us about those memories?
Well, I remember him talking about when he was a child. One of them was that I kind of felt was similar, but a little different. I woke up in the morning one morning when I was about 4, and the fact that I would even remember something that happened when I was 4 is beyond me. But I remember going to my mother and telling her that I needed a Band-Aid for my belly button. And my mother said, well, what are you talking about? I said, I just need a Band-Aid. And she says, well, what do you need it for? And I said, they told me that it would get infected if I didn't put a Band-Aid on my belly button. And she said, what are you talking? Who are they? And I said, Mommy, just give me a Band-Aid. And she said, well, basically, you're just dreaming. And fine, I'll get you a Band-Aid. And so she went into the bathroom and got the Band-Aid, put it on me. And that was it. I was totally fine, and we never talked about it ever again. But that scenario, I clearly remember being carried back to my bedroom. And I remember I felt these bodies hoisting me over them, like over their heads. And I felt that there were two, like one on each shoulder, and then one underneath two on my butt, and then two at my feet, carrying me over their heads to my bed. And they laid me down, and then they pulled the cover up to my neck. And that scenario has played out throughout my life during these experiences. I always remember being brought back to bed and having the covers pulled up for whatever odd reason. But that was similar with Whitley. And then his description and just the feelings and the smells and the...
Yeah, I remember him describing being carried in a similar manner as you described,
yes.
like you were being passed along,
Yes.
a bunch of different beings. And I think him saying that, there was something resembling insects about it, too, the quickness and the way they were moving.
Right.
But the belly button thing, just to drill down a little bit on that, in case the listeners are aware. So one of the common, table procedures with abduction accounts is, and most researchers or some researchers think that this is a reproductive procedure, that this is David Jacobs, for instance, think that this is the collecting of the eggs. One of the techniques. Sometimes they go in through the vagina, and then sometimes they put a needle in right near the navel. And if people can recall, Betty Hill, Betty and Barney Hill, had that experience. Was told in that experience, though, that it was a pregnancy test. But this is, just for the record, one of the common experiences that abductees have of them putting a needle down straight in through your navel, or around somewhere near the area of your navel. And some researchers think that this is one of the routes by which they collect eggs. And so it's not completely out of place that you might have from an abduction, some kind of wound or something in that area, because that's one of the common places where they put something in you, or some kind of syringe or needle or something like that.
Right.
And
I've had needle issues my entire life.
Yeah. Oh, phobias about needles.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any kind of physical, like, sensations, body memories from that event? For example, like phantom touches or reactions when you think about it?
No, I haven't. So.
And I would just also note that that's really peculiar, and I've never heard that before, that, they instructed you to tell your mother, to put a Band-Aid on that, as if maybe they had some foresight, that they knew that, this is because of their, omniscient perspective, being multidimensional. They knew that was going to end up getting infected, and they needed to, because they don't always do that. That isn't like the standard procedure,
I've never heard anybody say that before, so that is interesting.
So I think maybe they knew that was going to get infected somehow. And that, we can probably fix this by, informing her, telling her to, get the mother to put a Band-Aid on. Maybe, but that's interesting. And this wasn't something that was initially confused as a dream, right? Like, this was, you knew this was a memory from the moment that it emerged?
No, only after I read Communion. When it happened in the moment when I was 4, I just thought it was a dream. But I mean,
so you did initially,
because I shouldn't say, I knew that these things that would carry me back to my bed, I thought that was a dream. But then when I asked my mother for the Band-Aid, it was kind of this gray, it was a gray area. Oh my God. Sorry. I just had to make a pun. Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, what else would it be? Because, when you're 4 years old, nobody's talking to you about aliens. I mean,
right.
So you're thinking, well, what else could it be? Nobody's coming into my house at night because my parents are here, and they wouldn't let anybody come in and take me.
Right. Yeah.
So the only other option is a dream.
So it wasn't just because it felt dreamlike. It was because it was just out of the realm of possibility. And so where can you put that, other than interesting?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So now, are there any other, during this period, early abduction experiences of note that would be interesting to tell?
Well, when I did move to the cul-de-sac, my experiences started ramping up there. And I remember one night I was laying in bed and I had shutters, and all of a sudden I saw a light coming through my window because there were lines on my wall. And I panicked. And I thought, oh no, I knew that they were coming. And so I went and I hid in my bathtub, realizing that, well, I remember laying there thinking, why am I doing this? They're still going to come and get me. And the next thing, I blacked out. And then I woke up standing up behind my bedroom door. I have no idea how that happened, but I was standing up behind my bedroom door. And then go ahead.
Was that the same experience? Your conscious recollection, you were in the tub and then you were behind the
Yes.
door.
Yeah.
That was the same night.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
then did you go back to bed after you found yourself behind the door?
I did.
Or, yeah.
Yeah, I just went to bed.
Is there any more to that experience, or?
I don't remember anything from that experience, no.
I just want to note then, before we move on to another experience, so you knew you had some, because I always like to ask about this, about the altered state that normally sort of comes, right before, or sometimes when you're being taken up or right before they take you, some awareness dawns on you, or memory of the abductions, the reality of the abductions, and you knew, that like something must have happened, because you knew to go to the tub and you thought, I gotta hide, so there's some sort of like, conscious awareness of what's happening.
Yeah,
Did you have any conscious, like, do you remember having any conscious awareness of anything more? Like, you're aware that, something's coming and it's going to take you. Is there any conscious awareness that you remember having beyond that?
I almost felt like I just had a knowing, like I'm gonna say like a sixth sense that they were there. And I don't know if it's like a pattern. Maybe there was like a subliminal pattern that happened when I was younger, that as I got older, I started realizing that first it's the lights, and then it's the hum, and then it's the tingling, or, something like that. But I can't really recollect what it was exactly. But I always knew that it was a succession of events that would lead to the experience. And then it would always end up with me being put back in bed. And except for that one time I was behind the door.
Right. And that might fall under the category of one of the mistakes, where you're put back in the wrong place, which some people, I think even Mike Clellan, thinks that they're clues.
Oh yeah, right.
To make you realize that there's something happening here. There's some physical reality to this. It's not just dreams. That when you find that your sock is missing, and you had your sock on before.
Right. Or your nightgown's on backwards.
Right. Or you're in a completely different house, in a different bed. What's happened?
That's a problem. Oopsie.
But okay, so I believe you had some other abduction experiences similar to this, where you would wake up, you'd see the light, and then
the one pretty significant experience that I had around the same time, I don't remember anything happening prior to me ending up inside of a craft. I mean, I just appeared inside of a craft like that. Like, I don't remember being taken through a wall. I don't remember having any, like, oh my gosh, there's the lights and blah, blah, blah. I just appeared in the center of a huge domed room. And I'm just standing there in my nightgown. And I'm looking around, and there's like a bunch of grays, and they're all facing the craft, like the wall of the craft. And there's like a counter around the circumference of the craft. And behind the counter, it looked like there was a lighting coming up behind it that was illuminating the entire room. And I'm thinking, what in the heck am I doing here? And I looked to my left, and there were two, it looked like they weren't really aliens, but they weren't really humans. So I'm assuming they were hybrids. A boy and a girl, and they looked about in their early teens, and one was wearing a red suit and the one was wearing a blue. They were the only ones that turned around and looked at me, and they just looked at me, and then they just kept doing what they were doing. But when they looked at me, I just realized that their faces just didn't look normal. Like, they just looked a little off balance, per se. like they had like a bigger space between their eyes, and their eyes were bigger, but they had really big blue eyes.
Mm-hmm. And they were tight-fitting jumpsuits. One was
Yeah,
red. The boy
I
was
can't
in the
remember.
blue and the.
I'm maybe. I mean, I can't really remember to this day exactly who was wearing what color.
What did it seem
Um,
like they and the other Greys were doing?
okay, yeah, interesting. So I was asking myself that same question because I couldn't understand what they were doing. They were all sitting in a little, like a chair, like a little white chair that was attached to the ground, and they were all doing this and doing this
Seemingly with
with
nothing
with
there.
nothing there. Nothing
Mhm.
there. There's no like buttons, there's no lights, there's no toggle switches, nothing. But they're doing all this stuff. But they look like they were really doing something. So I'm thinking that, wait a minute, where am I? What is happening? And the minute I thought that, there was this huge archway to my left, and this enormous gray, kind of like a cross between like a gray and a mantis being, starts gliding across the floor, passes by me, and just stands over here and turns around and looks at me. And I looked up at him, and he looks down at me, and he had like kind of a bulbous forehead, and then just the typical like a mantis type shape face, but he had the gray eyes, and he was wearing a long like a cloak or like a cape that had a high collar, and it had a like a green amulet that would hold it together. But the actual robe itself, it looked like it was liquid mercury, and it was just kind of like shimmering around, like it didn't look like fabric at
What
all. It
color
was
was
really
it?
weird.
Do you remember a color?
It was like a silver, like liquid mercury is the best way I could describe it.
Do you want to bring up, while we're talking about description, Todd, our mantid pictures? I think we have a few. Um, so this didn't conform in appearance to how people typically describe the mantid beings. Like it seemed like it
No.
was different. Did it have the like one of the most prominent features of the mantid beings is the arms,
Mm,
sort of a sharp
right.
kind of
Yeah.
angled sort of um, at the wrists.
I didn't see his hands at all because he had that
Mm,
cloak on. And so they were
mm,
inside.
mhm. Okay.
And so I looked at him and I basically said, "Where are we?" In my head. I said, "I don't understand. You know, why am I here?" And he just kind of like nodded at me, and then he looked behind me, and all of a sudden, out of like nowhere, there was a three-dimensional hologram, and it was like a cube, and it looked like an algebraic equation. And when you looked at it straight on, it just looked like that. But when you went to the side, it was three-dimensional.
Hmm.
So, oh yeah. Yeah, see, he didn't look like that.
But
It didn't really look
he did have very large eyes that took up
right.
a
Yeah.
decent part of the
But
head.
they were more, yeah, see, they were more slanted to the side.
Mm-hmm. Sort
Yeah,
of like
that's
that.
more, yeah, more like it, but they were closer together. Like there wasn't so much space in between. Yeah,
Do you
again,
remember anything, any mandibles, or do you remember any
well, he didn't speak
detail?
at all. No,
Mm.
it looked like that, like more like that, actually.
Ah,
More like that. Yeah, and see, look at what he's wearing.
yeah.
Or is that
Long
his
neck.
breastplate? Or is that like his breastplate? I can't tell.
I don't know if that's a piece of clothing or if that's part of the anatomy.
Right. Yeah, it looks like it might be part of the anatomy. It looks like that's the sternum per se,
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing.
Possibly.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this math equation, and I'm 9, so it's like, what is this? And I see that the math is going three-dimensional, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty wild because I don't think we have that on Earth. Oh, that's similar,
That's
even
sounding.
with what he's wearing.
Do you remember a color of the clothing?
You know, when I'm talking to you, I actually might be able to find a drawing that I made.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
really didn't think that it would be. I should have had the foresight to find this, but I'll just keep talking. So he, I said, I don't understand this, and he says, "You'll remember when it's time." I was like, okay.
Which you hear that a lot, that phrase.
Oh, wow.
Interesting. So yeah, kind of like a gray, like a
Yeah.
bit kind of like similar to a gray. And so wrinkles on the forehead is
Yeah, I see what you
Yeah.
mean now. Yes, yes.
and a high collar.
And that's just in perspective of how big he was. I mean, I was like totally intimidated. But I on the one hand, I was so intimidated by him, and on the other hand, I felt at peace and so like relaxed and calm. Like he had such like loving energy for this enormous being, and I'm in this situation that is just like out of this world. No pun intended again. But
So you felt a loving energy, and
I
I'm
did.
curious about this. Was there any staring procedure prior to you feeling that loving
Oh,
energy?
maybe a little
Was
bit.
there
Yeah.
any,
Yeah.
looking into the
Yeah.
eyes?
Yeah, because I remember looking up at him. He was just like looking at me, and it was just like this, like taking a deep breath, just like a clearing breath.
Like he was taking.
No,
Do you know
I
if
felt that.
you felt like you were taking a breath? Yeah.
Mm.
So,
Did you
Jim,
have any
Jim,
sense of gender? Go ahead, Todd.
let me ask this quick question.
Mhm.
With the picture that she just described, isn't that more indicative of blues? Of the
Oh,
Because well, no, not in my opinion, because
no.
blues are almost always very short, and almost
oh,
shorter than
that's right.
small
That's right.
grays.
Do you mean like these blues?
Yes. Oh my goodness. So
Okay.
I'm trying to find a picture here.
Oh my goodness.
you've had experiences with the blues.
Oh yes.
We have to get into that.
Okay.
After we get through this one.
Yes. No, I'll take all
So,
these.
Jim, I'm going to present this real quick. Even though I know that you say that they were small, but I am just now curious because
Oh, right.
these are the ones that have like the
Are
things.
those David Chase's drawings? Yes, they are. He's a
Yes.
friend of mine.
Interesting. That's someone that we would like to talk with.
Yes.
He's very interesting. Very, very, very smart and very, very talented artist. Yeah, he showed me these before, actually. So, and I'm looking more at the very bottom on the very right-hand side. Yep.
That one?
Yep. Totally. Oh my God, that's so crazy.
Wow.
Minus the eyebrows and minus the big, the smile. Look, that's so similar. Look, I didn't draw that. You couldn't see like their stomach or anything because of the bed frame, but I called them little Michelin men because of that.
So they have the kind of role. I mean, I don't know if we want to delve into the blues yet, because I really want to kind of like dive deep into the blues, or as deep as I can. But they did have the kind of like jelly roll kind of rolls on the body. I have so far not heard that detail, and I'm always wondering, because we bring up this David Chase drawing from time to time, and most people describe them as kind of like the ones that were kind of more on the bottom left, the wrinkles, sort of brown, the dark eyes, and the hoods. They're very often described as having.
Oh, okay. So this is. I don't know if you can see it. Oh, okay. So there's the hologram. I just kind of drew that kind of loosely. So it was like a cube. And so you would see the equation in the front, and then you turn to the side and it would continue like three-dimensionally. So I felt like, oh, that means our math is really advanced. That was my first thought, But again, I was so young, I didn't even know what algebra was at 9 years old. So
Right.
Were you seeing like numbers, like R number script?
Yes.
So it was
like A equals,
translated into
right,
human
right,
characteristics or
right.
characters.
So
Um,
he showed me that, and then he said, I said, I don't get it. I just don't. I'm so horrible at math. And he said, you'll understand it when it's time. And then he imprinted a symbol to me in my head, and this was it.
Oh, wow.
and you remember it so vividly that you were able to. You're sure that that was the symbol.
Absolutely, I wrote it. I drew it down.
And,
I was very good at journaling and writing my dreams down. So this to me was a dream.
and where was that symbol at?
This was in my head. He looked at me and then I saw this, and so I remembered that when I woke up the next day. And so now looking at it, thinking it looks like a crop circle. Whenever there's a new crop circle, I always pay attention. And so far, I've yet to see anything that looks exactly like that. And I've put this out there to try and see if anybody else has seen the same symbol.
Mhm.
So,
So that the equation was outside of you, but the symbol was projected into your mind. And was it also three-dimensional?
no,
No, it was just that symbol in black, or was there any other sort of detail or background or anything else in the imagery, just that symbol?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then he said, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, what did he say next? Did he say anything about that symbol?
No, I said, what does this mean? Again, he said, you will remember when it's time. And it's like this, I kept saying the same thing over and over again. I was getting a little over it because I wanted to know,
Did it feel like a command to you when he was saying it?
Kind of like, don't forget this. He's saying, don't forget what I'm showing you. It really felt like he was just adamant that I remember this. And so that's why I think with the eyes and the staring, it just like really making sure that I'm paying attention.
Do you think it could be something deeper, like a trigger for future awakening?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or maybe, I don't know. I wish I knew, but my eyes are wide open. So then he said to me something really interesting, and that was that the cure for cancer was something that we used every day. And again, my 9-year-old brain is like, what? Because I knew what cancer was, but it wasn't really like something that I thought about on a daily basis because I want to play with my Barbies, so it's not like, oh, cancer, oh, okay. And I looked at him and I said, oh, you mean like toothpaste? And he chuckled, but telepathically. He said, yeah, like that. And I went, oh, okay.
How did he chuckle, or what was the...
I don't know. It just like my interpretation of a chuckle, a telepathic chuckle, which is
like similar to a human would chuckle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what a peculiar thing to say, of all the things that that he could communicate to you.
I think it was kind of like you silly humans are looking in the wrong place. That was my thought. And you're trying too hard. You're looking right at it, you're looking right over it.
Over what you think?
We're overlooking the obvious.
The answers. Yeah.
Well, for cancer, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought, wow, I mean, how could you tell your parents or anybody this? You're 9. You're like, oh, Mom, I had this dream. And guess what? The cure for, you're not going to listen to me. So it's like useless information. So, yeah, it was very frustrating.
And does it imply that they get cancer themselves, or I interpret it more as they have some type of healing technology that could cure cancer that they use every day. Maybe not necessarily that they get cancer every day, or
yeah. I have no idea about that. That was not impressed on me at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall him even alluding to that whatsoever.
Yeah.
So then what happened was, I said, I still don't understand why this is all happening. And so he telepathically told me to come to the side of the craft where the grays were. And he wiped his hand up over the wall, and it was like wiping the condensation off of a window. And it opened up, and it was a window, and I could see the earth. And I went, oh, I get it now. And then it was like, I got it, but I wasn't the least bit concerned about why I was on a craft, you know? It was like, all right.
And,
So,
and why did you feel that was giving you any insight into the question that you had, the fact that you were on a craft, you know, seeing space here, or what?
well, I think he wanted me to know
that?
what was really going on, you know? And so we're talking about the experience evolving. This was, I think, part of that, because I think all of my prior experiences were a lot more, you know, like the genetic testing and all that kind of stuff. And I even had some testing done in school. I was in a special class, kind of like what Whitley was in as well. So that piqued my curiosity. But he was basically saying, you know, this is what's happening and you're here. And, you know, it's almost like I was graduating to the next level of the experience by being able to be on this craft and having him give me all of this information to take with me. Now, full well knowing that nobody's going to really believe me because I'm a 9-year-old kid, you know? And, but that said, he then had me follow him to my left to the little archway where he actually entered the room. And so he didn't walk either, he just glided across the room. And so I followed him. And as we're going down this hallway, there are all these rooms on the exterior wall and on the interior wall as well.
With closed doors or open doors?
There were open archways again. And on the third one, on my right-hand side, I looked in and there were a bunch of kids my age in there. And they were all sitting in chairs watching like a slideshow. And it was so fast. It was like boom, 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 boom. And it was like fire, famine, war, floods, earthquakes, blah, and it was just boom, 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 one after the other. And these kids were like, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Clockwork Orange. It was kind of like that scene where he has his eyes held open, and he's being forced to watch this. It was kind of like that, but not like horrific. It was more, I felt he was imprinting or impressing on these kids that we are going to destroy the earth. But this generation has this information to take back with them to be the next generation that will try and change that by having this experience. That was what my takeaway was from that. Well, after I saw, go ahead.
Could it be that they're looking for some kind of emotional response from you? That's why they're showing you that. Like we've heard of contactees, they are in a room and they're being shown all these different images of death, dying, things like that. And I think and I think they said that was to get some kind of an emotional response. They were
certain abduction researchers
yes
opinion, that Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs in particular have that opinion. And they do have some grounds for that opinion. Like I kind of dismissed that at first. I don't know, like
well, it's all purely speculation. I mean, you can take away what you want from this, you know.
The grounds I think would be that I'm trying to recall. There's something specific that kind of gave me the staging. There's a lot of abduction experiences where staging happens, where they put you in certain scenarios. They're using, you know, psychic masking to make themselves look like humans or like something, and they put you in certain situations. And from the staging accounts, it seems like they may sometimes, maybe not in this event, maybe this is something completely different, but it seems like from our perspective, which could be just totally erroneous, of course, but it seems like they might be interested in our responses to things. So they're putting you in certain situations. They're all the while watching, there's beings in the room that are staring right at you, staring into your eyes while you're going through the experience. And that's why certain abduction researchers feel that they're studying human emotional response. But that John Mack believe, that they're altering human consciousness in these in the experiences that you're describing, in a for a positive reason, that they're showing you, what can happen, if humanity keeps going down the road that it's going down.
Correct.
And it does seem like many abductees, have this kind of change. And sometimes this change occurs when they go through regression and they uncover the experiences and they have the memories and then they have the transformative effect. And they become, more open to, metaphysical ideas, or they become more eco-conscious or what have you, and, environmentally, concerned, conscientious.
Yeah, I felt that. I felt that that's what he was trying to impress, or they were trying to impress on this group of kids. It was that, exactly what you just said. But I do also remember having scenarios where they were testing me and they were actually taking notes. I mean, physical notes. And I was
really?
blown away. I was blown away by that. I thought, what is that? I mean, it's like
writing implements and paper or some kind of animal.
Right. It is. But so, I almost feel like, do they do these things to make us relate to what they're doing so we can make sense of it by having these antiquated instruments? Maybe they're like, oh, maybe if we have a piece of paper and a pencil, they'll know that we're studying them. And so, because this is what they do,
Right.
I don't know.
It's
just a thought.
That hypothesis. But let's just get a little bit more in detail with, he brought you into this room. How many children? They were all children, human children?
Yep.
They were all staring at, did it look like monitors or was it
No, it was like on the wall. It was like a projection on a wall.
3D, like holographic stuff on a wall?
No.
Or 2D on a wall?
Like 2D.
And all the images were like, it wasn't like one sequence of like the earth blowing up, like it was just like one thing after another, like rapid, changing to a completely different thing the next second.
And it reminded me of like subliminal advertising, when they advertise for something and they have a blip of something that you're going to remember. It was kind of like that. That was my takeaway from that.
Which, I know that, we've just stated, John Mack had this view, that he thinks that, this does sort of alter consciousness, human consciousness in a positive way. But it does seem like on the surface that one might, easily argue that, that seems a little untoward, that kind of methodology, and it almost seems like, like just the normal human, seeing someone exposed to, just horrendous stuff, one thing after another, we wouldn't automatically see that as something positive, all these fearful images. And some abductees, just, to fully flesh this out, this sort of alternative perspective, do have, from the imaging, Dave Jacobs calls this imaging, when you're shown images like this, have trauma in their life and recurring nightmares about what they saw on things that disturbs their life, that kind of reduces their quality of living to some extent. But then at the same time, one could argue also that, well, maybe that is so, but if it, does result in the transformative effect of you becoming more eco-conscious or what have you, then it's maybe more positive than negative, if it changes the direction of humanity and we don't blow up the planet, then
True story.
And if that's, if that's what has to be done, if that's one method of doing it, exposing a lot of children, to the potential consequences of our actions, and then ingraining that in their subconscious, if that's a potential remedy, maybe it's worth, the little bit of trauma or whatever trauma, not to downgrade it to a little bit, but whatever trauma, arises from that.
Suzanne, when you was there, how was the children reacting emotionally and physically? Were they
Nothing.
blank,
They were
focused,
just
in
stone
trance?
faced,
Yeah.
in a trance. They didn't even look at me when I was standing there. And I'm thinking, why wasn't I in that group? I thought that was interesting too.
So you were just brought in the room to be
as an
shown
observer.
children, just to to be shown the show. So
Okay.
they wanted you to know that they were doing that. And this is interesting too, because this is the first time I've ever heard someone being shown someone else on a craft who was going through the imaging procedure. Normally, when you hear anything about imaging, it's the actual,
they're the right person,
who's,
right?
in the
Right.
on the table or the chair, or sometimes it's a chair,
Right.
and going through the process.
Right. So I wanted to just stop right here real quickly because I have an interesting story about this experience. I began a podcast back in 2011, and I interviewed an experiencer who had the same exact experience that I did. I'd never met him before, and he was sharing all these details exactly, even down to this experience with the kids with the sideshow, with the same being, and he drew a picture also, and it was the same as mine.
Wow.
And I have that interview on my blog, or on my podcast, and I also have a blog where we talked about it. So I just thought, oh wow, so how many other people are there out there? I'm glad I'm putting this information out there so that we can maybe get other people to say, hey, wait a minute, I remember that,
Yeah. Now, how much of the experience was the same? Just the end part of it in the room with the children watching, or the
everything.
whole beginning
The
part of
math,
it too, with the
all of
math?
it too.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
All of it.
Wow. You rarely hear that. Such a
I
close.
know.
There's a lot of consistency, and with the table procedures and things like that, that you hear, multiple people have gone through the same thing, but like such a match like that, like especially the sequence and everything, that's kind of rare. And interesting, and the same being.
Yeah. Wearing the same
Did
exact thing.
Was there any interesting differences or things that he remembered or recollected that added to your understanding of that whole procedure and
Not
sequence?
that I can remember. I'd have to listen to the interview again, but I don't think so.
Let me ask you this question. You actually, Mike Clellan talked to you, correct?
Oh yeah, we're very good friends.
And what was he saying about this encounter that you had?
I mean, I don't really remember exactly what he said, but I mean, I've shared all of my experiences with Mike, and we actually began our podcast simultaneously and our blogs as well, and so we've shared a lot and talked about these experiences in great detail. He's had his own experiences, so we don't really. It's nothing that he can say one way or another. Like, who can actually, tear it apart and say, okay,
Right.
well, this happened because of X, Y, or Z. We just don't know. But
I
he
was
knows
just
that.
curious of what his take was on what you experienced.
Yeah, I really don't remember. I mean, we talked about this experience probably back in the day, back in 2011. So it's been a while.
Right. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it has. So,
And that's
I
okay.
mean, no worries. So we really, it's been really great because he's written a few books and I subsequently became his editor. And so we work very closely together for the past 6 years or so.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Now, when you walked past the room, did you feel like you were meant to see what you seen with those kids?
I do, because he was very clear on explaining to me what, was really going on there, and that there was a bigger picture to not just what my experience was with him and my interaction with him and the information that he was giving me. I had no idea that there were other kids on the craft. And, knowing now, meeting other experiencers over the years, wondering if any of these other kids were there, or actually, I'm sorry, if any of these people that I've met were those kids on that craft.
Oh, yes, yes.
You know what I'm saying? Because I've spoken to many experiencers and interviewed a few experiencers, and, having my podcast and stuff, a lot of people have reached out to me just to, I don't know, we need to support each other.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of people out there who've had a lot of trauma, which I'm so grateful that if I have had trauma, I don't remember it. And I feel very strongly that there's a reason for that. Like I was saying before the show, that I have not been regressed. I really don't think that it would serve me in a positive way. If there are things that have happened to me that I don't remember, I don't think it would serve me. And I don't want it to disrupt my life. I mean, I don't think any way it would serve me positively if I did remember a traumatic experience.
Yeah,
So.
I was just going to ask, do you think that would be finding out different things? Do you think that could be very detrimental to your
Well,
psyche?
yeah. Well, I will tell you that my husband, who is also an experiencer, we went to California for my daughter's graduation a few years ago, and he said, I want to get regressed. And so he did get regressed, and I said, well, I don't want to know, because he remembers me from one of his experiences. And I knew that he wanted to have closure on that, and I said to him, I really respect that you need to have this closure for yourself, but if you could please not share the details with me, I would really appreciate it, because I was really afraid of knowing things that I didn't know about myself. So he ended up having the regression taped, and I did listen to it, and it is horrifying, because he saw me during one of his abductions, and he saw me. Not only did he remember me walking down a hallway with a tall white gray, like tall white being. It was like a gray that are like a lighter gray, but they're lankier.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't make their faces out, but he remembered their long, spindly arms that we were both holding their hands. But the one thing that he remembered that there's no way he would have known about me was my red plaid cowboy shirt with the white buttons. And I was wearing that. And I knew that he remembered something.
So he had never seen you in that clothing in the real life, but you had that.
No.
Wow. So that's a great sort of confirming thing there.
Horrifyingly so, yes, because I wish that he hadn't said that, because maybe, like a lot of these people who say, oh, regression, you have to be really careful because it's, all prompted and blah, blah, blah. And there is that. But then if there's, validation within, the context of the recording and the regression, then it's pretty much undeniable that it's real.
Well, sometimes, it isn't until someone goes under regression that they realize the reality of their experiences. And there is a positive effect from that. I know I'm not crazy now. I know that, that this is real. I'm not, there's not something wrong with my brain, and that can be enormously, psychologically beneficial. But it does seem like John Mack, and I can't, speak to this articulately as him, but it does seem as a psychologist that he believed that processing the trauma from abductions was extremely transformative. Or he felt that that potentially all of the transformative effects that the abductee goes through could potentially be explained just by processing the trauma, you know, confronting the experience and then integrating that there was, in his view, a kind of problem with the psyche when you repress memories that are harmful, and that when you reintegrate that back into conscious memory, of course, there is a very initial, you know, sort of tumultuous aspect of that. But eventually the reintegration of that memory does result in his view anyway, you know, some kind of transformative beneficial effect down the road that he seemed to consistently witness with all of his abductees. And he was really strongly of the view that once the abductee really confronted their experiences and stopped the denial of it and just faced it, that's when they, you know, had the most positive change, you know.
Well, with any trauma.
Yeah.
That's very true. Very true.
Yeah.
PTSD, I mean, it's rampant, you know, with many situations, you know, drug abuse, sexual abuse, you know, war. I mean, definitely there's a need for that. So I think it's a very important tool for sure. But with this particular abduction scenario, I don't know. I really feel very strongly that I don't think that I'm ever going to go down that path.
Yes, some people feel that way, and I can understand why, you know, like one would think that, you know, the only thing that's going to do me is create this memory of something that, you know, every time I recollect or recall, you know, is going to affect my conscious experience in the present moment and make me feel well. And so I really don't know, you know, I'm not a psychologist, but it seemed like John Mack had a strong case for the alternative to what you're saying, that it was worthwhile and potentially extremely rewarding to confront the experience and to go through it. But then at the same time, you do have the problem of, you know, what you find out and experience during regression, you know, is that the actual,
it's a long process,
you know.
Is it
authentic?
Yes, I was just gonna say, is it, if you figure out what the truth is it gonna be relief or burden? You know what I mean?
What do you do with the information? You know, like my husband said, he said, you know, I said, are you glad that you had the regression? And he said, you know, Yvonne had said, oh, I'd really like you to come back tomorrow for another session. And he's like, I don't think I can do it. And I said, well, are you glad that you did it? And he says, you know, I just have more questions now than answers. So once you open Pandora's box, you know, it kind of, it's, you know, you don't really get closure because then you think, oh my gosh, well, if this happened, then what else and what else and what else? And then what do you do with that information? Where do you put it, you know, in your life? You know, what is it for? I mean,
it's definitely, it seems to me like it's definitely some kind of a learning, a teaching experience. You're being shown something for some reason. It would be your regression to tell you why, and even you might not even get that answer anyway, even through regression.
Right, that's true. So I know we're almost at the top of the hour, and I know that you wanted to talk about these blue beings.
Oh yeah.
Quickly, like before we run out of time, because this is my confirmation event actually. When I was my oldest daughter was 3 years old. I was engaged to be married, and when my fiance proposed to me, I finally decided that I was going to be honest about my experiences with somebody in my life. I hadn't yet to tell anybody about them. But my reasoning behind wanting to tell him was that I couldn't promise that he wasn't going to be involved. And I had no control over it. And so I flat out told him, I said, you know, I just need to be honest with you that these things have been happening to me, and I have no control over it, and I can't promise that you're not going to be involved, and I don't know if it's ever going to end. And I said, so if you have a problem with this, don't marry me.
Mm.
And he was kind of like, oh, okay. So he's like, all right, yeah, I'll still marry you type of thing. So I'm like, okay, just telling you. So sure enough, we got married and things started happening. And we had this inside joke because it's like he knew things were happening, but he didn't want to know, but he wanted to know. Like he just would say things like, did the visitors come last night? Because I slept like crap. And I'd say either yeah, maybe, or no, or I'm not sure. But sometimes when I'd say yeah, they did, he'd never ask me what happened. He didn't want to know. So he would just basically leave the room. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a really very difficult situation to navigate because, I know that he just wanted to be married and all that, but obviously there was something that he had no control over. So one night I'm laying in bed and he's laying beside me and I couldn't fall asleep. And I'm looking up at the ceiling and I saw all these swirling different colors of like prisms, like squares and circles and triangles. And like if somebody had taken like a prism and shone a light through it and reflected onto the ceiling, you'd see like rainbows, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was seeing. And I was like, well, what the heck is going on? Where's that coming from? And I thought maybe there was a car coming down the street. We were in the second story. So maybe his headlights were shining in, but there was no car there. I could tell that wasn't the case. There was no beams coming through the window. But the minute when I went to look at the window, I realized that I couldn't move. And then a gold disc flew across my body from the window and manifested into a woman standing next to me on the left side of me, next to the bed. And I couldn't turn my head, but I could move my eyes. And I could tell she was blonde. She had long blonde hair. She was tall. And I'm like trying to scream, but nothing's coming out. And I'm just like, oh my God, just I'm trying to wake up my fiance. Nothing's happening. And I'm like, who are you? And she just speaks to me telepathically. And she says to me, where I come from, marriage is the most sacred part of our existence. And I am giving you the chance to experience this if you wish. I'm kind of beyond, like, not even thinking about what she's really saying. I'm just more freaked out about what's happening. So I said, I'm just so glad in my head, telepathically, I'm saying, I'm just so glad that you don't look like what you normally look like, because if you show me what you look like, I think I would freak out. And so she says, well, if you want to know what I look like, then look at the window. And so I look at the window and there was a mantis being, again, with my peripheral vision, a mantis was hanging from my windowsill like that.
Oh, wow.
It looked like a physical,
Wait a minute.
tangible.
How come I can't? Oh, because it's backwards. Oh my God.
We did see it, yeah. And it looked like a physical, tangible alien that was right at the window, like
the window, just hanging there with his head to the side. The minute I look at that, my doorknob started to jiggle. And when that happened, she booked across the room and went right through the wall. The door flies open, and then in comes these blue guys. And they're standing at the end of my bed. And I'm like, what is happening? And in my head, I'm thinking, oh my God. And they said, it's Elise. We can't get her to stop throwing up.
Sorry, say that again?
It's Elise, my daughter. We can't get her to stop throwing up.
The blue
and the
beam.
minute they said that to me telepathically. So the minute I heard that, I was able to break out of my paralysis, kind of like that fight or flight situation. And I ran down the hallway and she was crying. And when I got into her room, she says, Mommy, and she starts vomiting all over her bed. At this point, my fiance woke up And he said, "What's going on?" I said, "Just run the bath." And so he turned the bath on and we washed her off and I made the bed. We dried her off and put her back in bed, and I laid down with her until she fell asleep. And then she was fine, so I went to bed like nothing happened. In the morning, she was totally fine. Like there was nothing wrong at all. And she was sitting at the kitchen table, and my fiance was in the kitchen, and he goes, "Did the visitors?" And I went, "Shh, don't say anything." Because I had a feeling something happened with her. And so I go over to the table and I bring her her cereal, and I look down and she's drawing this picture of this.
Wow.
And I said, "Oh, honey, what is that?" And she goes, "Oh, it's the animal from my dream last night." And I said, "Oh, well, it doesn't really look like an animal, but I don't know." And she says, "Well, they're not really animals, but they're not really people either." Now, as I'm prompting her to answer these questions, I'm trying to keep a straight face because I'm terrified inside. But I don't want her to know that I'm alarmed at all. And so I'm smiling, saying, "Oh, that's really cute." You know what I'm saying? Just like, I don't want her to know that I'm scared. So I just said, "So tell me about this." And she goes, "Well, this is where the ears should be, but they didn't have any ears. And I don't know what that was." And she goes, "Well, that's the mouth, and that's where their nose should be, but they didn't have any nose." And I said, "Oh, well, they." And she says, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, how many were there?" And she said, "There were 3 of them." I said, "Well, what did they look like?" And she said, "Well, they were blue." And they were, I said, "Well, what were they doing?" And she says, "Well, they were smelling me and they were telling me that they loved me." And now I'm just like, I know something happened. And so I just said, "Well, what's this thing right here?" And she said, "Oh, it's a cloud, Mommy. They come from the clouds." And I just basically had to leave the room. And I just went in the room and I just started crying because I felt like, oh my gosh, now all these years, my entire life, I've been having these experiences and I had no control over it. And now I have no control over what's going on with my daughter or anybody else in my family for that matter. And I was pissed. I was so angry. But it's not like who am I going to call? The police? You know, it's like they're taking my child.
Yeah.
So, I mean, she's going to be 39 this year, and she has never talked about it. I asked her about it. I promised I would never talk about my experiences until my children were adults, which I did not do. But when they were adults and I wanted to share these stories, my daughter did give me permission to share the story. But she said, "I don't believe in it. I don't remember anything, and I don't want to talk about it."
I was just going
So
to
I said,
ask if she remembered it.
yeah, no, I totally respect her. I always have, and I always will. Everybody's journey is different. Mine was different. If and when she decides to remember it, that's her journey. It's not mine. So, but I just let her know that if she ever needs to talk about it, that I'm always here.
Do you believe her that she doesn't remember anything, or do you think that she actually does?
You know what? I have to believe her. I have no choice. I'm her mother.
Wow.
Wow, that is really something, that one. It seems like that was unexpected to the manted being who was masquerading as the blonde woman. Like she sort of ran out. Did she run out of there when she left the room quickly?
She ran across the room and went right through the wall.
And is there an interrelationship, I guess, between?
Well, I mean, obviously, this mantis manifested into something that would not alarm me, is what I'm thinking. But then what was the whole thing about the marriage thing, you know? So why would she say that?
Right.
I was about to get married, but so was I going to go with her to like her planet or like, I mean, when she said where I come from and that she was giving me the chance to experience that,
Giving you the chance
So
to experience what exactly?
what marriage being sacred, the most sacred part of their
A
existence.
sacred marriage. Hmm. And you knew that when the blonde woman manifested that it wasn't real. Yeah,
Right.
I
For
know
sure.
that you seemed like
Yep.
you were aware that that wasn't her true form.
That is correct.
And it looked like a mini UFO, the gold disc. Is that how would you just?
It looked like it was about 6 inches in diameter. It looked like a discus, like that they would throw like in track and field, maybe,
Yeah.
but double-sided.
Hmm.
So like that, but gold, like a almost like a bronze kind of brushed, not like shiny, or like a brushed gold.
And tangible and physical seeming,
Absolutely.
like if you could touch it.
Yeah. If I wouldn't have been able to move, I could have touched it.
Wow.
And the blue beings, they seem like, like they were out of their depth and they knew it and they had to come in and get you.
Yes. They didn't know what to do. Something happened. Something went wrong.
Yeah. And I wonder why she
And
got sick, or,
I know.
something that they did,
I
or
don't even want to
did
know.
she? Yeah.
Or possibly maybe that was to distract from what was happening and completely end it, because you had said that something went wrong, and maybe that was
That's what I was thinking.
a way for them to be like, okay, let's get her mind on something else. So we'll do a sick child and we're out of here.
I just need to burn this right now. Sorry.
Okay, no, you go ahead.
Yeah, you don't know what to take at face value,
Right.
with this
That's
phenomenon.
Well, Jim, do you have any closing questions that you would like to close with?
No, I guess we could end. We're at 2 hours, so I guess we should maybe end it here. This was a fascinating one, though. I really, really enjoyed this
Thank you so
conversation.
much. I enjoyed myself very much. Thank you.
There are some stories that you hear and you never forget them. And it's not because they're terrifying or sensational or even shocking, but it's because they ring a quiet bell inside. And that bell says, pay attention. Something real just happened.
Definitely.
And that is the truth.
Very
That's
true.
the truth, right?
Very true.
And
good point.
Suzanne, your story it's so fascinating, and we're so very happy that you decided to come on our show and talk a little bit, even though we just scratched just
I know. You have no idea.
It's still, for somebody out there listening and has an experience just like yours, and they say, oh my God, Suzanne had the same thing happen.
I know.
So now we know that there's
Very
others
important
that could reach out to you and ask for your guidance, your help.
Yes. Please do reach out to me. abducteeawareness@gmail.com. That's my email address.
And Suzanne, I will post all your links on a separate post, so people can go and check out your website and listen to your podcast. And you have a YouTube channel too, correct?
No, I guess I do. Yes, I do. Everything that all my interviews are there as well.
Okay.
And they're on my podcasts are on Apple Podcasts and all the regular platforms. So.
And what is the name of your podcast?
It's Random Alien Brain Droppings.
Okay. And I will put that link on there as well, so people can go listen. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Todd. Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Yes.
Very nice to meet you too as well, Jim.
Yes.
It was really a pleasure.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks everybody for watching, joining in, for asking your questions in the chat. And I can't wait to possibly have you on again, Suzanne.
Okay.
And go through some more of your
very
story.
happy to.
All
would
right.
love to.
Well,
Thank
you,
you.
everybody. And
Thank
you all have a
you.
wonderful weekend or week. I'm sorry. It's not the weekend yet.
Wishful
And,
thinking.
That's right. And we hope to see you all on the next
Okay.
episode of Paranomaly Beyond Disclosure. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you for tuning in with us tonight. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and follow to receive notifications when new content is made available. A Paranomaly Beyond Disclosure is looking to talk with ufologists, researchers, investigators, contactees, abductees, channelers, and more for upcoming shows. Or if you have stories, photos, videos, questions, suggestions, or comments, please contact us through Messenger or email us at paranomalypodcast@gmail.com. And you can also visit us at paranomalypodcast.com for more content and information, including all our social links. I thank you again for watching or listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode of Paranomaly Beyond Disclosure.